Yeah, you might be in here next Sunday because it's only supposed to be a high of 67 next Sunday.
Please, please.
And a low of 48.
Oh.
In the extended, now they could be wrong.
Were they wrong one time?
Those heaters that you can put under the rafters that the restaurants use?
They got them right out here
Yeah.
on the front porch. We
Yeah.
should take them over there. That's right. Or we'll just gather around the fire pit. Just worship right there. Oh, Kathy, you're thinking.
The sunshine comes up.
Yeah. Hi, Patty.
Yourself? Good. Deal.
How's Nate?
Yes. Still in the hospital.
Oh.
How old is he? 18.
Oh.
Wow. Seems so weird. Are they finding some treatment direction? Well, hopefully. He's in a private facility right now. We're just praying.
Where did you get that tray table?
Not ours. It belongs to the other church.
Oh, okay. That's nice.
Yeah, it's like an AV stand. They probably got it with their AV equipment. Yeah, it's got those telescopic legs. It's real nice.
It has a name on it, so you should be able to projector stand by Delight.
Projector stand?
Yeah.
Yeah, Delight makes screens and other equipment. Hey, Jim.
I'll always work from home. My office is in a shed, so
How's Sue?
Good. She'll be here in a minute.
Oh, is she feeling okay?
Much better. The antibiotic is what she needed.
Good. Did she have a flu type of thing?
Head. All head. Coughing, draining.
Oh, it's your time of year.
So antibiotics and steroids and all that good stuff. Yep.
Yeah, she was given the whole gamut.
Yeah, that seemed to make a difference.
Good. Good. Good morning. He went to get coffee. He went.
I was supposed to make it. I said I'd make it before 8 o'clock. I totally forgot. All right, we'll wait a few more minutes and we're going to dive right in. We got kind of a lot to get through today. Anyone have any thoughts that came up over the week that related to last Sunday based on what we were talking about?
For those of us that weren't here, what are we talking about?
Yeah, we're going to do a review here in a minute. And it's all recorded, so you can catch it. If you didn't see it last week or weren't here, you can still watch it, which I'd encourage. There's quite a lot. This is sort of a packed in 4 weeks. All right, let's go ahead and begin. The Lord be with you.
With your spirit.
Lord, we come together this day to study your holy word and to come to a deeper understanding of your great love for us and for what it is that this world needs to heal all that ails it. Lord, we pray that you would make each of us part of your healing balm that this world is calling for and needs so badly. Lord, guide us now. Fill us with your spirit. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Okay, let's do a little review from last week. We said that for many years, America, really the whole world, has been dominated largely by politics and economics, right? Either politics or economics. Politics is the government. It's the state. And it's about the acquisition and the use of power. It's about what we are able to do together, the us. The alternative to that has always been economics. Money. What can we do with money? The acquisition and use of wealth. It's about what we do as individuals. Me. So it's either power or money. And that's what drives so many cultures, certainly our own, right? And what that boils down to is either we force people to do what we want them to do, which is the way of power, government, laws. We make laws, you don't do them, then we punish you. We force you to do what we want you to do. Or, if we don't force you, then we can pay you to do what we want you to do, which is the way of wealth. It's about market. It's about business. So I can either force you by laws or I can pay you with money. And that's what drives so much of our culture. Here's the thing. Wealth, the marketplace, it all depends on competition, doesn't it? Businesses compete. We compete for what we can do with money and how much money we have, because the more I have, the more I can accomplish. Power, government, it's competition, isn't it? I'm competing with others for power, whether it be in a legislature, even in local government, even you see it in a school board, right? It's competition. My ideas, your ideas. And then we said, but is there a third alternative? And we talked about covenant goods. Remember, we talked about wealth and power and said if you share those, you end up with less. You share power, you have ultimate power, you share it with 9 others, you now have 1/10 as much. Same with money. If I have $1,000, I share it with 10 people, now I have 100. There's not a lot of incentive to share. On the other hand, if I share love or friendship or trust, what we call covenant goods, those depend on cooperation. And when I share them, I actually get more. The more people that I trust, the more trust I have. The more people that I love, the more love I have. The more friends I have, the more friendship, right? Those things don't depend on competition. Those things depend on cooperation. And that has the huge consequences that we want to talk about over these next few weeks. So, history shows us that societies can't exist without cooperation. You look back through history, this is what happens. Without cooperation, for somehow it seems like power, Lee, you're one of the best. Thank you so much. Thank you. Why can't societies exist? This is where we finished last week. Why can't societies exist without cooperation?
Because we have a world economy now, and we all have to join in and focus on how the world is going to work together to bring about a better life for countries that aren't as wealthy as ours. But that was the premise. I mean, if you think about it, that's where communism came from. I mean, it's you know, that was a value that China thought would be all inclusive, and everybody would be living the same life with the same opportunities. But that didn't come to pass, and neither did it for Russia.
And in order to do that, what they did is they emphasized power. They said, we'll make it real simple. People they don't have money. People that don't have money lose, so we'll just do it with power. Right? We will emphasize the power. And that's where communism evolved, from the acquisition of more power as the way to solve the world's problems. You just give us all the power and we'll make everything right. We will force everybody to do what they need to do. You will all share the money you have equally, and it'll all be good. And we know that hasn't been the case. Why isn't power and money enough?
There's something in politics. dictators and tyrants start out wanting to do good for the people. And it starts out, this is what's good for the people. And I want to do what's good for the people. And it shifts from the good of the people to the I. The classic example is Idi Amin Dada. He started out, he wanted to reform, he wanted to do good for the people, and then it became more about him than about the people. And eventually he solved the illiteracy problem by passing a law that people are born knowing how to read and write. So he had 100% literacy in Uganda.
So it's something about the corruption of ultimate power,
Yeah.
right? As human beings, it's hard to see where ultimate power has ever turned into anything except ultimately somebody abusing it.
And I can't help but think that, I'm just thinking in our own country, there isn't total cooperation in this world at all, and in our country, but I can't help but think there's a common element missing that brings us all together.
It's selfishness.
And it's
It's what?
It's selfishness.
Well, but I think God's missing, because the reason why, cooperation is everybody for themselves. It kind of sounds like people working together for themselves, but if we were all working together for a common goal, like God's goal, God's vision for this world, it might make that even stronger.
And by cooperation, we mean love, fellowship, trust. It's a mutual understanding among ourselves and of how we're going to live, and that we agree, we covenant with one another that we're going to live that way. So I want to get into why money and power is not enough, and it gets I think it's explained really well with this story that starts with Charles Darwin, the founder of the theory of evolution, because he had a problem in his life that ultimately he could never solve, and that's where we want to go. So he developed his theory of evolution. Basically, his understanding was all life evolves from natural selection. Basically, it's survival of the fittest. That life exists by competition. There are scarce resources. There's only so much food. Survival and shelter, we compete for that. And those who are strongest, fittest, they win. And those who don't, they fall by the wayside. So the plant or animal or human that is best at securing survive, and they will ultimately reproduce. And their offspring carry their DNA, making them also good at survival. So I've got a dog that was bred to be a swimmer. As they bred Labrador Retrievers, these dogs couldn't swim, they weren't bred. You didn't reproduce dogs that were afraid of water. You simply continued to reproduce dogs that could swim, until pretty soon you've got a breed now where in their genes and in their DNA is swimming. So you take my dog to the water, nobody had to teach him to swim. He knew exactly what to do. It was in him to do that. While other dogs were kind of looking, do I want to put my foot in there? No, he dove right in and had never seen water before and knew exactly what to do. This is what Darwin says happens. It's just what we did, right, artificially as human beings to breed dogs with certain skills and tendencies. He's saying that's actually the way the whole world works out there. The best reproduce, they pass on their genes, and so on. So if that's the case, then what Darwin said was ruthless aggression to survive will always win the day. How do you make it in this world? Ruthless aggression, right? Because I'm competing with everybody else. There's only so much to go around, and we need to compete for it. And so the one who is ruthlessly aggressive will win. They will reproduce. They will produce more ruthlessly aggressive people. And that's the way, he says, the world will work. That's evolution. All societies, he said, as a result, will value the most competitive individuals, the most ruthlessly aggressive individuals in their society. And in many societies, they do. We value the most ruthless people. There's something that's appealing to us about somebody who is ruthlessly aggressive because they get what they want. They get what they need. And Darwin would say, yeah, that's how we're made. That's how it all works. In a competitive world, who has the most resources wins. Simple as that. That's his theory of evolution. That's how the world works. And then he noticed that it doesn't always seem to work that way. There was a hitch in this. In every society he studied, what he found was people did not value most highly the ruthlessly aggressive people in their culture. They didn't, instead of valuing them, wanting to get close to them, wanting to be a friend of theirs, wanting to be close because I'll survive too. If they survive, maybe I'll survive too. Instead of doing that and valuing those people most highly, they didn't. In every society, whether it was from Africa to South America, but instead it was the most virtuous, honest, hardworking, generous people with integrity that every society said they valued most. Not the most competitive. They may be afraid of the ruthlessly aggressive. They may even respect them because they are so aggressive and so ruthless in what they do. They may fear them, but they don't value them like they do the person who is honest, hardworking, generous. This is what Darwin found. The most humble, generous, and kind were the most valued in every society. How strange is that? That doesn't make sense, given his theory, does it? It doesn't make sense at all. We should have no value, place no value on someone who is not aggressive. They're not going to survive. They're not going to make it. Only the ruthlessly aggressive survive. So what's the problem here? If our genes only care about their own survival, and ruthless aggression, he says, is the most effective way to survive in this world, how does a bundle of selfish genes, like we all carry, together produce selfless people? How do selfish genes produce selfless people? That is the question. So if evolution is reproducing only the most ruthless individuals, like Darwin suggested, how can unruthless individuals survive and be the most valued? Not only are they valued, but they survive. They actually do survive. We don't see it in animals. You only see it in human beings. I'm sorry? Some of it. That was his paradox. And he didn't solve it before he passed. And his followers didn't solve it until the 1970s. And it was a collaboration that went on to address this problem. And it involved biologists and sociologists and mathematicians and people focused on artificial intelligence, games theory, all of that sort of thing. Began to work together to solve this problem, and they came up with something that you may have heard of. It's called the Iterated Prisoner's Dilemma. Anybody familiar with that? The Iterated Prisoner's Dilemma. Are you? Yeah. So here's how this works. So two people take part in a role play exercise. They're two members of a criminal gang. They're arrested and they're imprisoned for committing a crime. So let's just for kicks, say one is Patty and one is Sue. Okay?
Oh yeah. There you go.
Two members of a criminal gang, and they're arrested. There was a crime, and they're arrested, and they're in prison now. And each prisoner is separated, and they are in solitary confinement. They're out of touch with each other. They can't communicate. And the prosecutors, unfortunately, don't have enough evidence to convict them on the principal charge. Let's say it was a murder. But they have enough to convict them on a lesser charge, conspiracy, something of that type. So the prosecutors go to each of them and give them the offer of a bargain. The opportunity to do one of two things. You can betray the other person and tell us they did it, or You can cooperate with the other person and just remain silent. But you can't talk about it. You're not going to plan this together. Each of you has to decide how you're going to handle it. So this is what it would look like. If Sue points the finger at Patty and says, Patty did it, and Patty says, no, Sue did it, they both get 2 years. They both get 2 years, right? We don't know who's telling the truth. If Sue says Patty did it and Patty says nothing, Patty gets 3 years, full punishment. Same with the opposite. Patty says, no, Sue did it. Sue says nothing. Sue goes to prison for 3 years. Patty goes free. If they both sit in silence and just refuse to respond, they each get a year on the lesser charge. Okay? That's the dilemma. What do they do? Well, neither knows what the other one is going to do. And Darwin would say, because betraying a partner gives the greatest reward, a greater reward than cooperation does, right? Betraying could mean I might get no prison at all. If I just say they did it and they don't answer, I'm out of here. If they do answer, I'm only going to get 1 year. Betraying seems to be the greater reward. All prisoners are self-interested. They will betray each other. That's the Darwinians' suggestion. It's going to look like that. So the only possible outcome for rational people, Darwinians would say, is option number 1. They both betray each other. However, when they did this with thousands of people, it seemed that in reality, human beings displayed this unexplainable bias toward cooperative behavior. Instead of choosing option 1, the majority chose option 4. Everybody just sat silently. They resisted betraying the other. That's not what would have been predicted. So although natural selection, survival of the fittest, works through our genes, right? And the best at surviving pass their genes on, and those offspring are also pretty good at surviving. On the other hand, individual humans seem to survive best when we cooperate. When we're members of groups, communities, solving problems together, seeking common goals. That's what churches are, right? Human beings survive best when we're in cooperative relationships. That's the finding of the iterated prisoner's dilemma. So it's not ruthless aggression. We survive best in communities. And how do communities survive best? Not on competition. Communities do best when they cooperate. That's covenant, cooperating, reciprocity, trust, love, fellowship. That's what causes a community to thrive. Not competing, right? A church where everybody's competing doesn't do real well, does it? Churches do well when everybody cooperates with one another, when we trust and love and share fellowship together. Makes sense when you think of it. One human versus a lion, the lion's going to win. But if there's 10 of us and we're all going after the lion, well, at least we've got a fighting chance, don't we? Groups thrive by cooperation and are best at surviving, more so than the ruthlessly aggressive individuals on their own. The very things that make human beings different, you were getting to this, Christy, from the rest of creation is what? God's given us the ability to talk together, to communicate together. We can reason. We can talk through situations. We can determine what is right and wrong. We have a sense of morality. We have the ability to love. All those have to do with our ability to form covenant communities, choosing cooperation over competition. So let me just pause there for a minute. Thoughts, reactions as you hear that.
There's a basic flaw in survival of the fittest because, yeah, if you have the wildebeest against the lions, the weakest are going to get killed by the lions. If you have the wildebeests against a drought, the earliest ones that die out are the weakest.
Mm.
The next group that dies out is the strongest because they're bigger, they need more nourishment to live, there's not more nourishment available, so they die.
Yeah.
It's the mediocre, the minimal, the middle class that's going to survive the drought because they're normal size, they don't eat as much calories, and
Yeah,
so
makes
they're the ones
sense.
that ultimately survive.
That's interesting.
and Produce.
Yeah. Yeah.
The implication of this is that we are training our youth only in competition. We're not training them in cooperation, except on a team where they cooperate with each other, but they are competing with another team
Yeah.
in order to beat them.
Yeah.
And so they're learning the competition model,
Mm-hmm.
even though it does involve some cooperation with a few others, but not with everybody.
So it's interesting. We can cooperate to compete.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, where the ultimate goal is still competition, right?
So somehow they're not being armored with the belief and the understanding that cooperation is a more peaceful way to get along in life.
Yeah, and it's actually what causes societies to survive.
Right.
Without it, ultimately, we're not overcome by another society. We actually disintegrate from within.
Right.
So we're different from all other creation because we're made to live in covenant relationships, and that's part of the way God made us. He made his people to be in covenant with him and to live in that way with others. So let's just go back and just, again, define what we mean by covenant. Two or more individuals respecting the dignity and the integrity of each other come together in a bond of love and trust, and they share their interests. That's what we're meaning when we talk about covenant here. All right, if that's the definition, individuals thrive in a community. Communities depend on cooperation. Cooperation needs bonds of sharing and trust, covenants. So that's kind of where I am now. And the converse is true. No covenant, cooperation starts to break down. In other words, we don't have trust, we don't have fellowship, when we don't have love, when cooperation starts to break down, the community starts to break down. When the community starts to break down, the individuals break down within the community. So it's a domino effect of what happens when the covenant goods begin to crumple and disappear. Where there's no covenant relationship, what if there's no covenant relationship? What if there's only competition and not cooperation? What if there's only the state and the marketplace? No covenant relationships, just power and wealth. History says societies don't survive like that. We can never have enough power to force people to do things they don't want to do. There's never enough. They'll always find a way out around the edges. I can never pay people enough to get them to do what I need them to do the right thing. There's never enough money. What I had enough today, I need more tomorrow. There's got to be some element of cooperation or the societies crumble. Jesus teaches us about cooperation and community, doesn't he? I mean, he lived with a group of people. He gives us skills and asks us to obey commands that are about thriving, love your neighbor, about everyone thriving within a covenant community, a community that cooperates with one another. They care for each other's needs. They support one another. He gave us a picture of this. And he called it his body. Not only is it just another worldly community, but he said it's actually, I'm there too. It's actually my body when you guys come together in my name.
One of the things, along those same lines is, he was telling his disciples, it's built on trust, but he says, don't don't save anything, don't keep anything. Go out and spread my word and trust that they're going to take care of you. Like, you know, you don't need to save up your money. You don't need to save up on anything, food. Don't store stuff. Just go.
Right.
And, you know, it will be provided for you.
Right.
You know, so it's not, I need to take care of me.
Right.
You know, I'm putting my trust that others,
Right.
with who I haven't even established this covenant with yet,
Right.
are going to take care of me.
That's right. Because he's part of the covenant.
Right.
He's in the middle of this. So when we focus all our efforts, right, on government and wealth, power and wealth, government and the market, and we think by changing those, change the economics, change what's happening at the government level, if we think that will solve our problems, this is telling us that that is misplaced effort. If we think, if I have to tell you, if we think the government is going to solve our problems and make it a better world, we're probably barking up the wrong tree. Is that hard to believe that? Same thing with the marketplace. I mean, good, strong capitalists will tell you no. If you get the economics right, everything will be good. And the ultimate answer here is no, that doesn't solve it either. Not that those aren't important. They definitely have their place. They have their place. But without cooperation, neither one will keep a society from disintegrating.
What's interesting is, using with the middle class is the one that would ultimately survive, but with the economics and power model, the middle class is the one that's being destroyed.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, in today's times, with unemployment and everything like that, I think he has a bigger plan for all of us. I mean, I've been working over a year and a half, and I'm looking for a job. I put applications in. Have I had any success? No, but I think he has a place and a time for me. I think I'm where I'm supposed to be right now. And watching my two grandchildren, is it a little bit more of a struggle for us to make ends meet? Sure it is. I mean, we lost a big portion of our yearly income because my job paid very, very well. And it's not there anymore. But you keep doing what you have to do. You know, you reach out, and maybe monetarily you can't give as much, but you still can. But you can give other things. It's helping a neighbor who is in a panic situation and said, my grandson locked both of my doors and I can't get back in the house. Can you come help us? You know, instead of her calling the locksmith, Jimmy went out and took 2 screwdrivers yesterday and jiggled the locks and got them back into the house. But it's just those type of where you focus, and it's just to have the faith that there's a bigger plan for us.
Yeah.
You have to allow your faith in that. I think in this whole world needs to come to realize that they need to get down on their knees and say, hey, what do you have for us? Because it's not always easy, and he never said it was going to be. But he's there with you. I mean, anybody struggling from cancer or anything will know that I have a young lady that I pray for. She goes, I felt him by my side the whole time I've been dealing with chemo and radiation. And I know I'm not alone in this.
See, those are the words of someone within a covenant community. And this is what the world needs, and it's what the church brings to the world. They don't know it. If you're not part of it, you don't know it. You don't know that there's a place where you can know other people will be there for you. That you also have God who you can trust, and you can place your hope in him. And I'm not doing it alone. I've got a group of people who are doing that with me. That's what keeps a society going. All right.
Part of it means that being human, you know, we may have, my faith is real strong here, and then it might dip down a bit from something that happened, or at least I don't feel it as much. But if you're in a covenant community with other people, they can hold you and your faith up while you sort of recover from whatever the dip was.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a community like that, you can't, you know, you won't exist very well.
The problem is we're kicking God out of the country.
Yeah, we're going the other way, right?
We are.
We are.
ACLU is now suing so that priests in the military can't mention the word Jesus. I mean, we can't say prayers in school anymore.
Right.
We're kicking God out of the country, and I don't know why people who are behind that have to do that and feel that they're making things better.
Yeah. Go ahead, Patty.
I just wanted to, riding on what this gentleman here said, Mr. Collins,
Yeah.
about our youth being taught. You know, I think this is where, the church is where the youth should be taught the word covenant. And I
Yeah.
think this, you know, is so important that it get out and reach and touch our youth, to bring them into this society, which is going to teach them covenant instead of cooperation instead of competition. I think that's what's so important about a church and youth.
And what I'm suggesting, that's what the church brings to the world. The world doesn't know it, but actually what will be the survival of society is actually here. And it's a great point. So what happens in a society where the church weakens, just what you're talking about, where the church gets weaker, either because the society doesn't value it or we don't value ourselves, right? Where believers in the community become fewer and weaker, less committed to the cooperation that they once were. When faith starts to evaporate from a society, where there's no other covenantal relationship to take place. There's nothing else coming in to fill that void of covenant goods. Then the very elements that a society needs to survive are also threatened now. The very elements the society needs. The result, this is what we see. Relationships start to break down. We talked about the crumbling of the individual when the community breaks down. Well, relationships break down. Marriages get weaker. Marriages are a covenant. They get weaker. Families start to get fragile. A community starts to atrophy. People turn on each other. They revert back to our animal instinct, which is when times get tough, compete. Times get tough. Remember the whole thing about the ruthlessly aggressive? There's something back there that says when times get really tough, the ruthlessly aggressive will survive. Maybe I either need to be that or I better know somebody who is.
That's the reptile part of your brain.
Yeah, no, you're right.
What does that mean? Like, can you give me an example?
Of what?
That where we revert back to an animal instinct with competition.
Sure. Where do you see competition going on in the world instead of cooperation? Just pick a place.
Well,
Besides everywhere.
besides, well, that's what I was going to say.
I think the obvious example is a place like our Congress, right?
Yeah.
Which, imagine it's a place of power, but imagine if it was a place of cooperation with power and not competition.
Okay.
Once we stop cooperating, now we just compete.
Okay.
How's that working?
I see what
Right?
you're saying.
So that's, yeah. So it's like
The reason you compete is to maintain your power.
absolutely.
It's all about
Absolutely, because if there's no cooperation, I better have wealth or power, because they're the only other two things that are going to help me survive. I got to have one or the other if we don't have cooperation.
Are they incapable of seeing? Why is the world so incapable of seeing cooperation and covenant? Why?
Because money makes people.
But they obviously see that it's not working.
Yeah.
Do they care?
I mean, it's a good question. I don't think it's
Well, the thing is,
it's not a turn-off switch.
You said it's a failure of the church. A lot of places, where is the church? Like, people trust in the church, very, very
Right.
So, I mean, if you need that kind of covenant, church-driven, relationships, and people say, well, look at those guys. Those guys are no better than anybody else.
Right.
Then,
Yep. We
then
did.
it's back to survival of the fittest. I gotta take care of number one.
Amen.
I'm
Exactly
not worried
right.
about anybody else. I'm looking out for number one, whether that means getting power or that means getting money. But screw you. You take care of yourself.
Yeah.
That's not my problem.
Or
Right.
even worse, people look at the church and they say, those people are full of hate and judgment.
Yeah. You hear that too.
Well, ego is a big part of this too.
Sure it is.
I mean, ego
Yeah.
and getting your way. Ego makes you want to get your way so that you're right.
That's right. Exactly.
And that's a terrible trap to fall into.
Being right has power, doesn't it?
There's absolutely no room for cooperation.
Correct.
Might makes right.
You gotta
It's
wonder,
sort of, oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead.
I think it's like the competition and the criminals you were talking about. Because if you think back to the way Congress is, it's almost like you have the ability to put blinders on like a horse. And so all you do is, it's not our fault, it's their fault, you know, and if they don't do blah, 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 it's not gonna work. And so there's no sense of any type of trust, it feels like, between those two things. We won't take the blinders off and say, yeah, well, you know, maybe we could, you know, you go to therapy or something and talk about somebody in an argument, and they're going to tell you, well, you have to own your part of it. Own it. What did you do that might have offended blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I think that is what happens there. That nobody owns the fact that, oh boy, we might have made a mistake, or we could have done this a little differently, and so there's nothing between the two sides. That's my opinion.
Well, it's that complete loss of trust,
Yeah.
right? Which is,
Let me suggest something through this. When we get further, Doug, when I take over
Yeah.
a little bit about it, or October, what you're dealing with, a very real level, is two completely competing world views and completely different understandings of language. And you cannot have a conversation with someone if you have no idea what they're talking about. If I began to speak Greek right now, you think, gee, he's smart, but what's he saying? And that's just a difference, but when you have fundamentally different understandings, then it's completely impossible to come. One of the things that we forget is that the Christian religion began in a world that had no comprehension of what it was talking about. And yet it converted the world. And that's what you have to figure out. The
Yeah.
problem in converting the world is it took in a bunch of the world's DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have when covenant increases, it seems like competition decreases, but when covenant decreases, it looks like competition increases
Yep.
in our society.
Yep. To Terry's point, if I don't understand you, it's really hard for me to build trust with you. Trust, let's face it, isn't something that just turns on, isn't it? Trust we have to build, we earn it. And unless we're willing to take that risk of trusting and learn that it was not betrayed, then I can build more trust if we don't take those risks to begin with. But if I'm always worried about the competition, that if I start to trust, I might get burned, then I don't. And competition's always where you revert back to then. Let's just fight it out. So what this does is it makes us all remember when, right? Whenever that was. Remember the old days when we all trusted one another in a neighborhood? When kids just ran up and down the streets and everybody knew that everybody's mom or dad was watching out for them and took care of things. Everybody helped out. My dad's cutting down the tree. Guy down the street says, I can help you with that. He comes up the road. Nobody called him. He just comes. He brings a saw. We all cut the tree down together. Nobody had to lock their doors, right? Kids were safe on the streets, and there was this trust. Now, I don't know whether it really was like that or not, but that's what this causes. It makes us revert back, and we remember that. And there's something that says to us, that was good.
Yeah.
That cooperative community was good. There's something that happens within a church, that kind of where kids say they have lots and lots of parents and grandparents in the church because they know all these people that care for them. It's a wonderful, healthy thing to grow up with that, isn't it? And many don't have that today. So there's something that tells us that, yeah, that is a better way than competition. We shared common goals. That's part of it, right? We were all trying to raise our kids the same way. We all wanted them to grow up to be good, honest people with integrity. You kind of had all those basic things that we all kind of shared. When there is no relationship like that, people feel vulnerable and they start to feel alone. You turn those feelings then of loneliness and vulnerability, and I feel threatened, and I don't know who I can trust. Literally, I do not go a week that someone in conversation doesn't say to me, I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody. I hear this everywhere I go. When you turn that out, it turns into anger and violence. You turn it in, it's depression and anxiety and eating disorders and all the other good stuff that we see proliferating. We see all of that proliferating throughout our society. And what I'm saying here, I'm suggesting those are the symptoms that we see when the cooperative, covenantal communities begin to break down.
Another problem
Yeah.
is that, I guess way back when, communities were small.
Hmm.
There was one church. Everybody saw each other all the time. You went to the one store in town. You know, everybody went to the same hair salon. You saw the people who were in your church all the time. I see people 2 hours once a week, and other than that, I don't see anybody. Is that really a community? No, not in my opinion.
That's a really good point, Christy. It's really hard, you think about it, to be a church in suburbia. We have people who, you know, the ends of our parish go 40 miles across from where you are, Christy, all the way out and beyond Cranberry. I'm sorry? Yeah, I mean, and everybody in between. So that point, right, that we don't see each other every day, living it out together. We're living it with a lot of other people, but we don't really spend a lot of time with each other. That's very different. So it's much more challenging, isn't it, for us to be able to form, create, and sustain that covenant community.
Yeah, my theory of the decline of American civilization or society is the invention of the color TV and the air conditioner. I grew up, everybody was on a stoop all the time. You know, we had what you talked about.
Too hot to stay in.
You know, if I did something wrong, my parents knew about it because the person down said, you know, I saw your son down there. He was like, you know, they were like firecrackers or they were doing something. You know, but when all of a sudden people got air conditioners and color TVs, everybody went into their own little hole, and that whole sense of community gone.
Yeah.
Well, the internet has just exacerbated all that.
Well, that just makes the fury come out. Yeah, there's no community there. Then you can be even more.
Oh, the anger and the violence, lack of civility, respect toward one another begins to decrease in our shared lives. I begin to care less about you. I'm caring only more about me. And ultimately, it's a loss of freedom because I have to back into a safe corner. I don't have the freedom to just let my kids run. When I have young parents who say to me now, I won't let my kids in the driveway if I'm not sitting there with them, I feel so sad for them. How freeing it was for us to just go play. And to my parents who could just let them go out and play.
Right.
I mean, you know, we're talking about, you know, a small period of time here. Back when I was a kid, in the great scheme, that's a very short time. I don't think the world was just perfect in the 1960s by any means. But there was a freedom. You can see when you look over that time, the loss of freedom as a result.
We did it in the 80s too. My
Yeah.
parents would let me out at dawn, like be home in time for dinner. We didn't have cell phones.
Right.
So all the kids on the road, we would go do whatever the heck we wanted to.
But you better be home for dinner. That's
Or
right.
have the big bell in the yard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
whistle.
Oh, yeah. My cousin neighborhood, we had various calls for different households.
Yeah.
One, they could whistle real loud.
Yeah.
One was the bell.
Yeah.
I think we had police whistle.
Right.
We definitely had,
All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We talked about this the last unit that I did about loss of trust. But you can think of all the things that, we're talking about, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that there were things we trusted. We just trusted them that we can't necessarily trust anymore. So much trust has eroded, and you might think that's the cause. It's actually the symptom of the loss of community. One of the things when we lose community is we lose trust. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. But it's this idea of shrinking circles of trust. Trust is built by human interaction. It is really hard to build trust in somebody you don't know, you don't see, and if you can't communicate with them, to Terry's point. Trust is built by interaction. It's the grandparent that I see regularly that I can begin to trust. The police officer that I see who walks down the street where I live every day when police used to walk beats. The
That
teacher.
word interaction does not include emailing people or texting them.
You must be reading ahead. The teacher who talks to me one-on-one. The neighbor I see every morning because they walk their dog together. That's where trust builds. Trust is not built on a screen alone. It's hard for me to build trust. How many people, it's so common now to run into people who met online, right? Father Chris and Catherine met online. There's also a lot of people who have met online and it turned into a disaster, didn't it? It's dangerous to think that that's building trust on a screen. It's not knowing somebody. That's not the conversation you have with the neighbor walking the dog that you see every morning down the street. It's not the same kind of relationship building. Churches run on trust of God. You have to trust your pastor. The pastor has to trust the members. We have to all trust the leadership. It's foundational, right? But it's, as a covenant community, that's what we do. But when people and organizations that we once trusted now betray our trust, then the whole circle of trust begins to erode, right? That's where we are. So it's taken these 2 weeks to kind of get us to this point. And next week, we're going to start deep into the Old Testament now and look at where it all began. And I think we will see in the Old Testament that this is lived out very clearly. And we'll ultimately end up with the story of Joseph, which I think is a perfect example. We'll get into Joseph, a perfect example of how covenant not only saved him, his family, his people, but also a whole nation of strangers because there was covenant. All right, I'm going to stop there and just open it up to any other comments or questions.
Father Ron, it reminds me of the time when we did mission work. And we rented vans.
Yeah.
And we had a sign on the side that said Vacation Bible School. And several drivers went through neighborhoods in the Navajo area. And their kids just came on the bus. And they all had the same name.
That's right.
They all had the same name. And you're like, okay. They all said the same thing. And they gave us their children for a whole entire day. And trusted us enough to bring them back home, except when you didn't bring them back home, they got very upset, didn't you? The little kid got off at the wrong bus stop. But, that was in the late 90s, and we were like, oh, we would never do this at home. Just a different time and a different culture. And then like...
They had great trust for...
Yeah.
We were from that church, and that was it. We trusted. Yeah, we were all shocked.
For a whole entire day, and it was